the last video I want to watch is about perhaps the greatest and most important philosopher who's ever lived. Jake, we have this fired up. There we go.
Oh, Lord.
Who is John Galt? This is one of the most famous questions in modern literature. Even today, over 50 years after it was written, you'll hear people asking it. Why? Because it recalls the riveting suspense story, heroic characters, and powerful ideas portrayed in the best-selling novel Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. Born in St. Petersburg, Russia on February 2nd, 1905, Rand became one of the most celebrated authors and philosophers of the 20th century. Her most famous novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, still sell hundreds of thousands of copies every year around the world. Rand lived through the early years of the Russian Revolution, saw her father's pharmacy business confiscated by the Bolsheviks, and experienced the horrors of communism firsthand. She longed to emigrate to America. In 1926, she did, and never looked back. To Rand, the United States meant freedom. She saw the founding fathers as heroes. They created a country based on individual rights, man's right to his own life, to his own liberty, to the pursuit of his own happiness, she said, means that every individual has a right to exist for his own sake, neither sacrificing himself to others, nor sacrificing others to himself, nor to the government. The practical results of the American system, Rand said, could be seen in the skyline of New York City. America's skyscrapers, she noted, were not built by public funds nor for a public purpose. They were built by the energy, initiative, and wealth of private individuals for personal profit. And instead of impoverishing the people, these skyscrapers, as they rose higher and higher, kept raising the people's standard of living. Rand advocated pure capitalism, which she described as a system in which the government acts only as a policeman that protects men's rights. No bailouts, no special favors for big business, no government intervention into the economy. When people are free to produce and trade, and when the government is limited to protecting rights, everyone benefits. Individuals thrive, societies prosper. How do we know this? Compare freer, more capitalist societies to less free, more statist ones. In Rand's day, America compared to the Soviet Union, West Germany to East Germany, more recently, South Korea to North Korea, Colombia to Venezuela. Such differences were painfully obvious to Rand. So were their causes. In Atlas Shrugged, she showed how easily a free society can collapse into a dictatorship. The heroine, Dagny Taggart, works tirelessly and brilliantly to save her family's railroad business, while ever-increasing government interventions destroy businesses and crush the economy. Meanwhile, one by one, the top producers across various industries mysteriously disappear. No one knows where they have gone. The only clue is a question they leave behind. Who is John Galt? As the economy crumbles, how do politicians, bureaucrats, and academics react? They blame the greedy businessman and decry the profit motive and free markets. Their solution? More government intervention, which of course only makes the problem worse. Sound familiar? Atlas Shrugged is a cautionary tale about pursuing equality over excellence, state control over free markets, but it's also about the power of the individual and the power of reason. The individual's reasoning mind, Rand argued, is his tool of knowledge, his only means of understanding what is true or false, how the world works, what is good or bad for his life. This is the theme of Rand's work more broadly. In order to thrive, to achieve happiness, the individual must think for himself and live by the judgment of his own mind. To do this, people must be free, free to voluntarily exchange ideas, goods, and services for mutual benefit, free to speak their minds without fear. For this, she regarded capitalism not only as the best, but as the only moral social system. Capitalism does not tell man to suffer, but to pursue enjoyment and achievement, she argued. Capitalism does not preach passivity, humility, resignation, but independence, self confidence, self reliance. Above all, Rand emphasized capitalism does not permit anyone to expect or demand the unearned. Is this the system America lives under now? No, said Rand. She called capitalism the unknown ideal because it has never been fully implemented, even in America. Ayn Rand's ideas on capitalism, individualism, and reason have attracted millions of people to her novels, essays, and lectures, and still do. Who is John Galt? I'm Gloria Alvarez with the Objective Standard Institute for Prager University.
This video. That's awesome, man.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about this, I'm going to point this out in the chat, is okay, so they said that Rand immigrated to the United States in 1926, and, there's all this prose poetry about these skyscrapers, she saw when she was getting there, the glories of, this private profit system. This is 3 years before, the 1929 and the beginning of the Great Depression.
Yeah. No, that is pretty on point. And like people forget too, like not to open up the Bitcoin thing here, but whenever I warn people about some of the kind of excesses of that, I remind them that like when the stock market crashed here in the US, like you could read, like you can find them like old newspaper articles, and it's just advertisements like buy stocks, like no downside, like only wealth, right? And like the problem was with that is like too many people, right, are pursuing their own pleasure over anything else, right? Obviously, I don't blame the stock market crash on everyday people just trying to,
Sure.
make a little bit of money. But it's like it shows that kind of ideology, because like what is annoying to me about Ayn Rand and like her big defenders is they try to make it seem like it's an egalitarian philosophy, right? Like it's for everybody in the sense of like you can like try to achieve your own greatness. They do admit that only some people will achieve it, but they say the door is wide open for folks, right? But in American capitalism, when we have seen like these kind of things open up to everyday people, it's too like honestly to try to bring in more suckers to buy the shit from you before the thing collapses, right? I know they have their counter arguments as to why that happens, but I'm saying like it's not egalitarian at all, right?
No, it's definitely not, and I think that you get I think a lot of people who got into Ayn Rand, like, they understood that perfectly well. That's like Ludwig von Mises said, I think like wrote her a letter where he's like, oh, you're great because like you dared to tell people that like they suck and they're terrible, and it's these few captains of industry, who make everything great.
Well, the thing that's ironic about Ayn Rand is like if you look at her as like an ideology of capitalism, I would have to say, even though she has Russian roots, like specifically like a particular type of American capitalism, she is such like a freakish excess of that ideology that like she really is more of a coping mechanism for like masses than like truly the engine of folks who are titans of industry, right? Like even somebody like Mark Cuban, who loves Ayn Rand, who names his boats after her and all this kind of stuff. At the end of the day, when things start getting bad, they want there to be increased government spending in any kind of crisis like the one that we just had, right? Like all of this kind of narrative, like we don't like government intervention, goes away the moment that they need the government to socialize losses in moments of capitalist crisis.
Well, I mean, the most vivid illustration of this is that I think this was actually the very last debunk I did for TMBS before Michael passed away, is that the beginning of the pandemic, the Ayn Rand Institute actually put its hand out for PPE money.
Yeah.
Like,
this is the thing that like, not to get too like nerdy about this, but this is like people need to understand like that's what the role of the state is in capitalism too, right? Is like to maintain and make sure that the financial system is operating without kicks. And that's something that like capitalists themselves want and they desire, right? So these kind of ideologies that they try to make to sell They're kind of like naked power grabs. People, you got to treat them like the trash that they are, really.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think their excuse for that, which was also Rand's excuse for being willing to go on benefits personally, is that as like a taxpayer who'd been
They're getting their money back.
that she'd paid into the system, which I think it should take about 10 seconds of thought to see that could be a much more general justification for the welfare state. But possibly the best thing about this video is the contrast with the last one we watched, because you'll notice that one of the things that she said is that capitalism has never really been tried, not even in America.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that too, and I mean that's the fundamental. That's the baseline for these kind of arguments that are coming from PragerU, is they are meant for people who have like extremely short attention spans, right? And it's whatever is the most convenient at the moment. Like they're not trying to build up like one truth, right? Like a true ideology that you can stand on its own, right? It's filled with contradictions because again, it's in the most conservative thought at this point. And I would argue probably historically as well too, is to make the unacceptable seem acceptable, right? To just make clear excesses of class society seem to be natural, and to try to discredit any kind of criticism of the current state of things.
No, exactly. I mean, that's the one of the big threads running through Michael's book Against the Web about how reactionaries always try to either mythologize or naturalize historically contingent hierarchies, which, I mean, Ayn Rand is one of the most extreme versions of that, right? I mean, because it's this like crazy worldview that like even she knows is inconsistent with normal human values.
Can we just say something on that really quick on human values? Because I don't swim in those waters as much anymore about like real true philosophy. But I think Obama's famous line, right, was like you didn't build that, like talking about the roads and all that kind of shit, right? That's the typical like liberal argument against it, right? And fair enough. But I think another example, I think that it's useful to push back against these like pure individualists, is another communal system that we all interact with, which is language, right? Like that's something that is like given to you from the society, from the community, from all the people around you. It allows us to communicate with one another. It's inherently social, and it's something that you cannot replicate on an individual level, right? It's something that you utilize like from the moment that you become verbal, right? Which is really when you enter into society at large, and you can use it, to your advantage for your entire life, right? And it's something that precedes capitalism, of course, right? And shows that as creatures, as like as beings, like we are communal. We need to be in communication with one another. I don't know. Like I can't imagine some kind of like Ayn Rand parent being like, I'm not going to teach my kid like how to speak, right? They need to figure it out themselves.
Yeah, right. It's like you remember the Simpsons episode with where they do the musical version of Streetcar Named Desire, and they have the Ayn Rand School for Tots, where they explain that when the baby asks for a pacifier, they're saying I'm a parasite, I want to depend on you. So yeah, there's this obvious disconnect with normal human values, but the whole point of this worldview is to provide some sort of romanticized justification for what otherwise couldn't be justified.
Yeah. And I also just have to, do my good lefty point about the skyscrapers in New York. Not only is it before the collapse, but come on, man. Like those didn't, like that wealth did not just like get developed there through like some people's genius, right? It's like through slavery and through occupation. I mean, South America essentially was turned into an open pit mine. And for people who have not read Open Veins of Latin America, I highly suggest it, because you might recognize that the history is one of like exploitation, but until you really realize what's happened, just like resources and people, what's been stolen from them for centuries upon centuries to create the wealth of both the United States and Europe at large, right? You will recognize that any kind, like if you are to make any kind of historical narrative about the skyscrapers of New York, it's like those are the crowns that have been stolen from the labor of workers across this country, across people who were forced into slavery, and then people who were, had their homes taken from them, and all of the wealth and mineral resources of their communities, literally ripped from the ground. It didn't just come because some guy fucking invented the cotton gin there. You know what I mean? The cotton gin.
Yeah, right. I mean, and Rand's examples were all like hilariously off key like that, like in Atlas Shrugged, right? John Galt, is that's all on a rail, like on train, railroads. And it's like, okay, hold on just a second. In the Ayn Rand utopia, where the government couldn't intervene in the economy in any way, and property rights were sacrosanct, could you even have a railway system?
Oh yeah, no, because it doesn't work.
So any farmer who didn't want to sell, I mean, what would this railroad route look like?
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, for people who aren't familiar, like the U.S. government had to get involved because letting a free market system run that was a complete nightmare, and it was just not going to be able to do what we wanted to do as a society, right? Which was to expand westward. And with all the problems that come with it, obviously, but I'm just saying, like, this was a moment where, like, the government said, if we want to achieve these kind of social goals and be able to have industry and an economy like that we would like to have, which would be, a dominant industrial society, we have to socialize these railroads, because if we just use basic like free market economics on it doesn't work, because it monopolizes way too quickly. The prices get absurd. It's another reason why we have the post office and all these other kind of things.
No, I mean, absolutely, right. I mean, this is why, like, yeah, that Charlie Kirk debate with Assad, watched last week. He makes a big deal saying, like, if markets work everywhere else, you put that aside. Why shouldn't they work in healthcare? It's like, well, I mean,
they don't work.
All goods are equally elastic, and so, like, there are, if you have a if the coffee shop across the street raises its prices too much, you might not go get coffee there, but, like, you're going to buy your EpiPen no matter what.
I mean, the best example, I mean, it's like, rural hospitals, man.
Right.
I mean, it's a great example of how market incentives, like, do not really work out for people. I mean, it's just like, it's operating from their own world. And I also have to say, like, as someone who lived in New York for a while, when you walk through, I mean, maybe this did this is FDR, so maybe it's not fair.
Yeah.
It doesn't know, like, there are so many monuments back to a time when America was very interested in building public buildings for the use of the people, right? The public libraries and university systems alone. Like, there's a lot actually of things that were done just with the goal of the public good, and not just for somebody's profit, that are just as beautiful parts of our history and our skyline.